Reminder now of our breaking news this hour. Hamas is handing over the bodies of 2 more Israeli captives held in Gaza. Their remains being turned over to the International Committee of the Red Cross before they'll head to Israel. It'll be the first exchange since the Israeli violation of the US brokered ceasefire, which saw more than 100 Palestinians killed in Gaza by attacks overnight into Wednesday. Tareq Azzoum is live for us from Az-Zawayda in central Gaza. So, Tareq, we understand the bodies have been handed over to the Red Cross at this point, right? Take us through the process after that.
Well, yeah, that's right, Sami. Hamas has handed over the bodies of 2 Israeli deceased soldiers, deceased captives here in the central area. The exact location remains unknown, simply as a part of the security preparation to smoothly and respectfully release those bodies. And we saw the vehicles of the International Committee of the Red Cross moving to Ceasefire military checkpoint in order to deliver the bodies to the Israeli side, who on the end, they will try to carry out medical examinations in order to identify the bodies before notifying their families. We can see on the ground that people are quite skeptical about what might come next, especially following the release and the handover of those 2 bodies, given the fact that every time Hamas is handing over the bodies, we continue to hear strong rhetoric from the Israeli Prime Minister, who has just threatened Hamas to completely stick to the terms of the agreement. Otherwise, Israel will act decisively in Gaza. So there is some sort of more diplomatic momentum being really taking place behind the scene by Qatar, Egypt and the United States to ensure the durability of the deal and to push both sides to commit to the terms of the agreement. But we saw how the process went smoothly on the ground. Names were handed over to mediators. Logistical arrangements were guaranteed in order to ensure a very smooth delivery of the bodies after long days of searching and digging beneath the rubble of the targeted areas where those bodies were concealed and buried under the debris of the targeted neighborhoods. And the International Committee of the Red Cross has played a very significant role to facilitate the process of delivering the bodies to the Israeli side, who right now is taking the lead in terms of the identification process and the complete procedure to inform the families. People on the ground are quite delighted that Hamas managed to find the bodies, because they believe that if Hamas was not able to find the bodies, a new round of escalation would completely outbreak in Gaza, which is something that people on the ground have been desperately looking for an end of it. So, Sami, the situation remains very tangled regarding the continuation and the sustainability of the ceasefire agreement. People believe it's quite fragile as it sounds, given the scale of destruction and attacks that were conducted once the ceasefire took effect. And it's worth reminding our viewers that now at least 17 bodies were handed over to Israel from Gaza, and there are still 11 others waiting to be released by Hamas, as the ongoing operations of digging and searching are still taking place in multiple geographic locations across Gaza, as Hamas from its side has been citing severe concerns about the operational challenges they are facing in order to restore the bodies, while Israelis keep pushing for an acceleration for the entire process. Meanwhile, they are still preventing international forces and experts to access Gaza to provide an assistance in this regard. So the equations are still quite complex, and we are still heading to more critical times regarding the future of this ceasefire agreement and how the release of the deceased bodies will certainly impact and shape the future of the entire deal.
And Tareq, there is 11 bodies that need to be handed over. How much concern is there about the fragility of this ceasefire? If there's any more hiccups, delays, problems, challenges in trying to find those bodies. We saw 100 Palestinians killed in like 24 hours in Israeli strikes.
Well, people in Gaza are quite concerned about this angle. They say that Israel might take any excuse regarding the procrastination of the release of the Israeli deceased captives from Gaza to resume its attacks and to cause significant level of destruction and chaos, as what we have seen before. A couple of days ago, and even in the last week, when Israel targeted the vast majority of the Gaza Strip and caused a matchless destruction in tented camps and also inside residential areas. But for many Palestinians, they are still quite skeptical about how Israel will deal with Gaza once all the living and deceased Israeli captives are handed over. They believe that Israel will stick to its guns in terms of the disarmament and the withdrawal from Gaza. For many Palestinians, they want to see the milestone of the ceasefire really shaping before their eyes in terms of tranquility, calm, and also the protection, not just of civilians on the ground, but also for an unconditional flow of humanitarian supplies into the Strip, a full change in the living conditions, and the onset of the reconstruction process. All of this is quite linked to the progress made of the ceasefire deal and how Israel will allow to all necessary humanitarian supplies to access Gaza and to enable civilians to reclaim some sort of former life that has been quite broken by Israel's operations in the Strip. And let's be clear about this point. Israel is still, till now, delaying the entry of the agreed number of humanitarian aid trucks. They are refusing to move to the second phase of the agreement, despite the main concerns and the diplomatic momentum that was undeniably seen by mediators. And from the perspective of the Palestinian public, they do not want to see war resuming again. And this has been also shared by mediators who are calling both sides to keep pushing with the agreement, to keep sustaining the possibility of making the ceasefire durable and achievable as well. But there is a very remarkable sense of fear among Palestinians about the possibility of war resumption again. They say that they do not want to see the bloodshed, destruction and displacement to happen across Gaza. They also share their concerns about whether Hamas also will stick to the deal, transfer authority to the foreign-led administration, or at least to abandon its weapons. So the entire process is still quite tricky and grim as it sounds, where people on the ground are still stuck between the political demands of both sides and how mediators will continue to exert and show the leverage of both sides to keep pushing with the terms of the agreement and to ensure a long period of stability in Gaza that can help to reconstruct the Strip and basically to ensure that this area will be completely cleared from any hostile environment.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much to Tareq Abu Azzoum. Well, let's go live back once again to Hamdah Salhut. She's in Amman. She's there in the Jordanian capital because Al Jazeera has been banned from reporting inside Israel. So, Hamdah, just give us an update on the status that we're hearing at this point. The bodies have been handed over, we understand, to the ICRC. We're looking at some of the latest pictures of ICRC vehicles in Gaza. Any confirmation of where we're at from the Israeli side?
The Israeli military has confirmed that 2 bodies of Israeli captives are on their way to forces inside of the Gaza Strip after they were received by the International Committee of the Red Cross. The military will then take them to the central part of the country to a forensic identification center where their DNA will be tested to see who these captives are. This has been a huge sticking point for the Israelis, who accuse Hamas of violating the deal by not releasing all the bodies of hostages on those first 3 days of the agreement. However, Israeli officials, American officials, and those who mediated this deal knew that that was not going to be the case because of how difficult of a task it is to exhume bodies in an area that has been completely destroyed with millions of tons of rubble. Benjamin Netanyahu says that this needs to be done immediately, and the family members of those captives say that they're demanding answers from their own prime minister because he has been ignoring them, he refuses to speak to them, and they're not really getting any of the answers that they have been yearning for, saying that they need the closure to bury their loved ones. They're certainly not endorsing a return to war, because then they say it would be much more difficult to try and get back the bodies of their family members. But at the same time, Netanyahu continues to say if Hamas violates the deal, there will be more airstrikes similar to what we saw just a couple of days ago, and there will be consequences that Israel will essentially do in the form of military attacks. Hamas says that they have finally gotten some sort of assistance on the ground in terms of heavy machinery, equipment, specialized teams, but it was something Israel didn't allow in for weeks because they just said that Hamas was violating the deal and this needed to be done sooner, but did not want to provide a solution for how the process could be expedited as a whole.
And Hamdah, are Israeli officials explaining how they think that airstrikes, that kill 100 people, 50 of them children, would help speed up the process of trying to go through the rubble and find bodies amidst the lack of heavy machinery? Because according to the UN, a lot of it was hit in earlier Israeli airstrikes.
Well, I'll just point to comments from the Israeli military chief of staff and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu just moments ago, speaking to a graduation of Israeli troops, saying that Israel is prepared to go back to war at any moment, saying that if Hamas continues to violate the ceasefire, if they continue to withhold the bodies of Israeli captives, there are going to be consequences, and Israel is going to continue to perform powerful and imminent strikes. Those are the words of Netanyahu, and those were the words earlier in the week when he authorized the Israeli army to carry out what he called powerful and immediate strikes. They didn't really say, of course, that these sorts of attacks would be an impediment to try and get back the remaining bodies of those Israelis still held in Gaza, but he was rather pointing the finger at Hamas, saying that Israel is going to decide when and where to act as long as they feel there's some sort of threat to the deal or threat to Israeli troops, but not mentioning at all that these sorts of airstrikes are not only violations of the deal, but also can harm the deal as a whole, because mediators have said they do not want it to fall through. President Trump's administration has told Netanyahu that this is the only way forward, and they need to make sure that the ceasefire sticks.
All right, thanks so much. Hamdah Salhut there reporting to us from Amman in Jordan. Well, Dan Perry is the former editor of the Associated Press in Europe, the Middle East and Africa, also the publisher of Ask Questions Later on Substack. He joins us from Tel Aviv. So, Dan, at this point, we understand the bodies are kind of halfway there, I think we can say. They've been handed over to the ICRC. Does this mean where the ceasefire is back on track?
I think Israel said the ceasefire is back on track as long as, of course, the bodies keep arriving. This still leaves us, I believe, with 11 hostage bodies still to be accounted for. And I think we will continue to see these mini resumptions of the war as pressure on Hamas to return all the bodies if Hamas continues to take their time in returning all the bodies. And obviously, you can present a reasonable sounding argument that Gaza's in ruins and it's difficult to exhume them, but I can assure you that the Israelis don't believe it. They think Hamas is purposely dragging this out to buy time, that they're playing games, that they're trying to do psychological terrorism on the families. This is how they feel. They refuse to believe it. It's true that from the beginning, there were indications that Hamas might have misplaced some of the bodies, but I think the Israelis were assuming that was 2, 3, maybe 4, and I believe that's also what the Americans were assuming. So that 2/3 of the bodies were missing in the first week, and now by piecemeal, they're miraculously discovered. This looks like machinations, and the Israelis, in their skepticism, are responding accordingly.
Given what the UN said for months has been saying back in April 23rd that approximately 92% of all residential buildings in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed. 50 million tons of debris is left. And that Israel targeted in earlier strikes some of the heavy lifting equipment, key heavy machinery. Wouldn't it be helpful if Israel allowed in more heavy machinery and halted the airstrikes and give a little time for retrieval of bodies? Not only the Israelis, but there's also an estimated, according to this UN report, 11,000 bodies trapped under rubble. Those are the human beings that also have families, right, and want to see their loved ones come back.
It's obviously a monumental catastrophe. No one needs to be convinced of that. But the Israelis simply don't believe that these bodies were misplaced or, in most cases, buried under rubble along with Palestinians who were the victims of these airstrikes. They are absolutely certain that Hamas knew these were significant cards that it holds, and that they stowed them away in places that are protected, in tunnels and so forth, and that currently the idea that they need to be found is a mountain of lies. I myself don't know. I have no idea what Hamas did with the bodies. I'm just relating to what it is the Israelis believe now. I doubt very much that you yourself or many of our viewers would doubt that Hamas is capable of such games. It's a very dangerous thing to be doing if that is indeed what's happening. The bigger issue, honestly, is whether Hamas agrees to disarm. Even if the bodies issue is resolved, Israel will be very much tempted to resume the war if it turns out that the deal that they think they agreed to, which was a 20 points that includes Hamas disarming, turned out to be simply a hostages for end of war deal, which Netanyahu has been resisting for the past year and a half or two. It is true that that deal alone was supported by the majority of the Israeli people. But it was not supported by the government. So when they agreed to the Trump plan, the assumption was not only that the bodies would be returned together with the live hostages immediately, but that Hamas would agree to disarm and evacuate the Strip in favor of a civilian government backed up by the region and the world and all the rest of the points that we know very well. There is no public evidence that Hamas has actually agreed to that. So I have grave concerns that the ceasefire may indeed fall apart.
How much support is there within the Israeli cabinet at this point to go on with the ceasefire, and for how long?
With the exception of the two far-right parties, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, that have become almost the world celebrity Jewish right-wing fanatics, most of them support it. But if you confront the cabinet and many people in the street with the question what to do if it turns out that it was all untrue and Hamas is not disarming, rather they're consolidating their control and running around massacring opponents, then that's a real open question. And then it comes back to the U.S. Because for Israel to resume the war in earnest would require the permission of the U.S. I'm not so sure that will be forthcoming, even if it turns out that Hamas played a trick and is not intending to disarm. There will be other methods, I think, discussed to compel Hamas to indeed disarm, but I fear most of those will involve more suffering for the Palestinians. I mean, I think they're going to try to smoke out Hamas.
Let me ask you this: should there also, Dan, be pressure?
All reconstruction.
Should there also be pressure if we would really want an end to this and disarming Palestinian armed groups? Should there not also be a similar clear commitment for Israel to allow national self-determination for Palestinians to have the same equal human rights that Israelis have and not have to live under siege and occupation, something that endured for decades before October the 7th, right?
I mean, that's a self-affirming statement. No one could possibly say no, the Palestinians shouldn't have equal rights. I can only give you my analysis that for the Israelis to agree to a military pullout from the West Bank, which is what you're really talking about, that's a significant security risk. I don't think viewers know. That would leave Israel 9 miles wide at its narrowest point. The West Bank, from the West Bank, you can see the towers of Tel Aviv. It surrounds Jerusalem on 3 sides. For them to agree to do this and give the Palestinians these national rights that you're so passionate about, there cannot be.
We should all be passionate. It's not personal, like human rights, right? That's something.
No.
Sammy, when it comes to security, do you understand the Palestinians' concerns that they might see after suffering a genocide, as well as decades of occupation, that there is a security risk to them, right?
So, allow me to answer. Genocide is highly debatable, and I do not think there was a genocide. There was tremendous, awful suffering and massive death. Occupation is indisputable. Of course they've suffered occupation. I'm explaining that for Israel to pull out of the West Bank is a monumental security gamble that they will not take if there are jihadist groups that are armed with a record of attacking them from any liberated territory and a record of overthrowing the moderates in the Palestinian Authority. If those groups exist, primarily Hamas, but also Islamic Jihad, they will not take that risk. Right. Now, I would also distinguish between individual human rights and national rights to have a country. A lot of groups can claim a national right, from the Kurds to the Catalans to a million other groups in the world. Not all of them, sadly, actually have a country. There are a lot of people in Israel that support a two-state solution, if only out of enlightened self-interest, because they want to have a majority Jewish country, and they don't want to be accused of apartheid, and they don't want to have people of unequal rights. But on the other hand, the security gamble they perceive from pulling out of the West Bank while Hamas exists is too profound, which is why we come right back to this deal. For anything good to happen, including all the wonderful things that we're talking about here in terms of Palestinian statehood, Hamas must implement the deal. Comes down, I think, to the mediators and to the US and to the world to make it clear.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Dan Perry, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Don't miss out and get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insight. Like, share, stay ahead.